look at, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. If you have not seen them yet, the triad assignments are up in Mighty Network. So pop over there and take a look at them. So it's a long post. So I've tagged everyone. So it gives a little bit of instructions and then it gives the assignments. So you have been paired with 2 other students and a supervisor. So the supervisor is going to be with you for your first triad session. And their purpose in that first session, tell my phone to be quiet, is to help you to understand the rotation process, and then to help you give one another feedback. Because in that first group, it's not, the supervisor's not there to give you all feedback on your coaching. They can, if you want that and they want to do that, but it is about how to coach you guys through doing that rotation and then enabling you to be able to give each other feedback. Because for those 3 middle sessions, it will just be the 3 of you. And we still want you to be able to have feedback, but it'll be feedback from your peers, okay? And then the last session, the 5th session, your supervisor will be there. And that is when they will fill out their final evaluation of your coaching. And it's not like we're gonna make a decision based only on that one. We're gonna look at all of the forms that have been filled out since you started practice participation groups. So that will be their role in the final session. It'll be the same supervisor. So say for instance, you've been assigned to a triad with Kimberly Weeks. Kimberly Weeks will meet with you in the first one and she'll meet with you in the last one. So hang on here just a second. Let's look at the handouts. So, so these are the guidelines and you can go through and read these. The most important piece is down here describing the rotation. Because in each practice group, in each practicum group, each of you will get the chance to play the role of the client, the coach, and the observer 5 times. So not in one session, but once every session. So each one of you have a half an hour to coach and get feedback. So 20 minutes to coach, 10 minutes for the observer and the client, and for you to ask questions and get feedback from them. And then it rotates to the next coach. So we ask that you keep the rotations the same throughout the entire practicum period. So if it's myself, Sarah, and Jennifer Kandera in a triad, throughout the entire 5 sessions, I will always be coaching Sarah. And the reason that we ask you to do that and not to switch it up is because we want you to have that experience of a progressing relationship, okay? To know what it feels like to start with someone and pick up with them the next week, pick up with them and keep going and see the benefit of the relationship that you will build with that client over the course of those 5 sessions. You know, maybe get the chance to, you know, complete some recovery goals, set some up and make some progress towards those, okay? This is not, these sessions are not sessions where you need to fill out any paperwork, okay? So you don't need to do the safety risk assessment. And today's protocols, we're going to be talking about the 2nd and 3rd appointment protocols. You don't have to do any of that paperwork. So it's kind of like you've already had a couple sessions with them and, you know, you're coming in as if it's like the 4th session that you have with a client. Sweetheart, is there anything else in terms of talking about, this just outlines all of the different rotations, what they look like. and everything like that. Sweetheart, is there anything that I have left out?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. So the pairings are up in Mighty Networks. So if you go over there, you see, I noticed some of you have already started connecting with your partners. So you can either use that post thread to connect with them. You can send them direct messages, whichever you're comfortable with. You do not, technically, the practicum period does not start until the 1st of July. Which is not next week, but the week after. So connect with them, set up times and dates. When do you want to meet that first time? You can meet by any means that you would like to that has a video component. So you can't do it just over the phone, but you can do it in Zoom. You can do it in Skype, Facebook Messenger video chat, Microsoft Meetings. I think Google has a meet function now. Whatever way that you want to meet, you can meet, and according to your schedule. So you don't have to look at meeting anybody else's schedules except for your other 2 triad partners and then the supervisor for the 1st and the 5th session. So we give you a couple of weeks of knowing these pairings before the practicum period actually starts, so that you have a couple of weeks to iron all of this out. When are we going to meet? How are we going to meet? Now, if you decide, hey, we've got it all together, let's actually start next week, that's okay. If you want to do all 5 sessions next week and it works with everyone's schedules, that's fine too. Whatever works for you. It's entirely up to y'all on how you want to go through this process. So if you have a hard time, say 2 of you in your triad immediately connect, you connect with your supervisor, but you just can't get a hold of that 3rd triad member, reach out to us. We'll help track them down for you. On the odd occasion, we have a 3rd triad member who never responds to the, hey, where are you? Can we set this up? And in that case, touch bases with us. We might tell you just to go ahead and start as a dyad, okay? Then in that 1st session, your supervisor will tell you how you will do that. And what it means is instead of 90-minute practicum sessions, you'll have 60-minute practicum sessions, and you won't have an observer. And I'm trying to think of anything else. If you are struggling to connect with the supervisor, please reach out to us and we will facilitate that for you. I can't think of anything else, sweetheart. Anything else about the practicum groups?
No, only just maybe the technology. Did you say about the technology side?
Yes, you can meet, in whatever meeting software you would like. If you choose to meet via Zoom, one of you will need to have a paid account. And I think it's $12.99 a month, because if you have a free account, you cannot meet with more than 2 people for longer than 45 minutes. And you need to do 90 minutes. So one of you will need to have a paid account. So if one of you doesn't have that and you decide that you want to use Zoom, then, maybe you can send one person, $4 and, they can get it signed up and using it. Whatever works for you. You can also use Skype. Like I said, if you all have iPhones, you could FaceTime, whatever it is that works for y'all. For your 1st and 5th meetings, the supervisor might want to use their Zoom room, in which case they'll tell you and give you that link. That handout that I just went through with y'all is up in that same post. It's also up under the certification requirements part of the syllabus. Practice groups. Go ahead.
Just add as well, just a bit of a top tip. With your portfolio, you are asked to do a 10-minute recording. A lot of students in the past have used their practicum experience and taken a 10-minute recording of that session towards their portfolio. So if you wanted to do that, just ask your members, your people in your triad to say, hey, is it okay for me to record this, use it for my portfolio? And that is absolutely okay as well. So.
Yes, yes. So if you want to kind of kill two birds with the same stone, you can. And I encourage you to record either the last, one of the last sessions, because we're looking at this to see that you can demonstrate all the competencies, although we will also be using the other practice groups as well. So not everything does not hang on the 10 minutes that you're going to send in for the portfolio video clip. Practice groups. So the rest of this week, all of next week, that's it. Audio and video. Audio and video. That's why when you meet in your triads, you cannot meet just over the phone. You cannot meet in a source that's audio only. You want to be able to see your client. That is so much part of what we read and see and observe, is seeing the client and how they're responding and how they're doing. You can watch to see if they're getting activated. You can watch to see what their body language is telling you that their words are not. I'm so sorry. So the rest of this week, next week, final practice groups. We have gotten word that some of you need a few more. And so Gina will be offering practice groups that next week. She'll be offering 3 final practice groups the week of the 28th of June. So 28, 29, 30, and the 1st. She will be offering 3 additional practice groups. So if you need more than there are available between now and the end of next week, watch for us to post a link in Mighty Networks that will allow you to sign up for any spots in the ones that Gina is doing. Okay, I think that's it. Sweetheart, any other housekeeping type of things?
Nope, I do not believe so. Nope. And there's no homework this week, I think so.
Yay! Seriously. Happiness, happiness. Okay, so last week we did the first appointment, the initial appointment protocols, right? We talked about the brief intake, we talked about the safety risk assessment, and we talked about the activities of daily living. And if someone scored high enough or had a circumstance that would trigger the escalated care protocol, we talked about that. So I want to take just a minute. In the Wednesday class, there were quite a few people who were like, this sounds really scary. I'm not sure that I even know how to work with clients who are suicidal. I understand. I absolutely do understand. It is scary. So I want to make sure and offer y'all a couple of points of thought. And the first one is that I am preparing you for the worst possible scenario. Okay. I am preparing you for, if you have a client who is literally on the edge of deciding they don't want to be here anymore. You will not encounter that type of situation very frequently. In fact, I'm going to go into Mighty Networks after this class, and I'm going to post in the main group thread, like places like where I posted the, we hired Bradley Hall to do the accreditation. And I'm going to ask our coaches, how often have they had to use the escalated care protocol? Because I'm thinking it's going to be pretty infrequently. And I have, over the course of all of my work, had clients who were suicidal only a handful of times. So I want you to be prepared to deal with that scenario, but it doesn't happen a lot. Okay, so I want to make sure that seeing that, going through that, didn't make you think, holy moly, this is going to be a part of my everyday experience. It's not. However, as a coach, you are welcome to place whatever boundaries in your coaching practice that you would like. So if you want to set up a boundary of, I do not work with clients who have a history of suicidal ideation. I don't work with clients who have an active drug or alcohol addiction. That's okay. You are absolutely free to do that. And so if you do that initial appointment, or you can even say, I don't wish to work with clients who score more than 40 on an escalated care protocol. That's okay too. This is your practice. You get to set the boundaries. And I want you to have a practice that feels comfortable for you. Okay. Now, just because you screen those out ahead of time doesn't mean that somewhere in the course of the work, something is not going to come up where your client flips over into suicidal ideation, and you will have to then be prepared to deal with that. But you are more than welcome to set boundaries on your practice according to what you are comfortable dealing with, okay? You don't have to open the gates and say, okay, I'm going to take anyone and everyone who wants to work with me. You know, you can have those discovery sessions. You can put on your website, I am not equipped as a coach to deal with crisis issues, you know? And so, you know, I prefer to work with clients who have done some of their recovery and are now, you know, solidly in or past, you know, any dangerous points in their care, something like that. And if you need some help putting together some kind of wording, please reach out and we will help you with that. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that you guys got those two pieces of information. Escalated care protocol does not get triggered frequently. And two, you can set any boundaries on your practice that you would like to, because it is your practice. And I do not want you to be working in situations where you are uncomfortable. Okay, so it's entirely within your purview to say, this is where I work, this is where I don't work. Okay. I think that's it in terms of information from last week. So this week we're going to talk about, so that was all in the initial session. This week we're going to talk about the second appointment protocol and the third appointment protocol. Okay, so the second appointment protocol is where we do that detailed intake. Okay, we took the brief intake in the first appointment. Now in the second appointment, if they're still working with us, you know, maybe they had to get escalated right away and they decided they didn't want to work with two people. This is where we do the detailed intake. And then the third appointment is where we start to set recovery goals. Okay, so first appointment, brief initial intake, safety risk assessment, activities of daily living. Second appointment, detailed intake. Third appointment, recovery goals. Okay, does sometimes it take someone more than one appointment to give you their trauma history? Absolutely. Then can you put off doing the recovery goals until when you're done with the detailed intake? Absolutely. Okay. But that's the pattern that I want you to follow. Safety, complete intake, recovery goals. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a deep dive into those handouts. Let's see here. Now these handouts, the protocols that I've set up, mirror what I was taught to do and what I used to do as a therapist. And also the processes that I have gone through in my head for, you know, good gravy now, 30 years. Holy moly, I'm old. 30 years. So some of these are summaries of what I do after having done this experience for a long time. So when I put together the intake, I put together the questions that I typically ask because I see them to be beneficial. Can you add in more questions? Absolutely, you can. Would I prefer that you not take away anything? Yes, I would. Because I think all of the questions that I asked, I tried not to ask ones that I thought were not germane or might be extraneous, okay? So second session, detailed client intake, third session, recovery goals. So let's take a look at these. I talked last week about not sending these forms to your client and having them fill them out before that first session, and I stand by that. If you want to send your client the client intake form and have them fill that out and come back to a session, you can. I don't. I always like to put eyes on my clients while they're giving me this information. And I also want to write down everything myself, filtered through my coaching lens, okay? Because some things my clients might say that they might write on this that really doesn't have a lot of bearing on what I'm doing with them. So I prefer to fill these out within the session. If you would like, you can ask your clients to fill these out and bring them into session, and then you can go over them with the client and say, okay, I see you put here, can you tell me more about this, okay? Don't take the intake and just stick it in your file and not look at it, because again, we're looking for the big picture. In this intake, we're going to be asking a lot of questions about their trauma. You want to get those, we're collecting those edge pieces, right? Getting the big picture. You may never again talk with them about certain parts of their trauma, because again, we don't focus a lot on the past. We focus more on the present and the future. So this may be the only time in your coaching relationship that you do a deep dive into what happened in their past. So I don't want you to think that we're gathering all this information and we're going to sit in it for the rest of the coaching relationship. We're not. What we're doing here is you're trying to understand what happened, where did patterns start, what kind of experience have your clients had, and as you watch them, as you listen, you can go, okay, here's where I'm sorting on the whiteboards again. So if someone says to me, yeah, and my dad was always so angry when I was a kid. My mom was always so angry. My big brother was always so angry when I was a kid, but I was never allowed to get anger. I'm going to take that piece and I'm going to put that up on, a whiteboard that maybe says emotions. And then at some point, if it comes up again, I'm going to ask, what happened when you were angry as a child? What happens with you now when you feel anger? So it's a big Easter egg hunt, right? And you're looking for those nuggets of information that are giving you that big picture view of what's going on for your client. Some of these are things that we ask in the brief intake. So if you want, you can just copy those over onto this form. But I find it's a lot easier to have it all on one form than to have a few on this form and a few on this form. I like to congregate my data in this one spot. You want to ask them about their medications. You want to know what medications are they taking. Why? Because we don't prescribe them. We don't give advice about medications. Because again, it gives us that big picture perspective. If I have a client who says, yes, actually, I'm taking metformin for my diabetes. This is the dosage. This is the doctor that prescribed it to me. That might be the first that I hear from this client that they are diabetic. So I might ask a few questions about that and get a viewpoint for what that's like for them. So I do want to know all of these, and I do want to ask any questions that I might have about them, because it's all information. Sarah.
Thank you. So how do you handle clients and signing up for appointments if they need at least 3 to get the initial assessments? Clients sign up for multiple instead of 1 at a time?
Absolutely, you can. Absolutely, you can. I have also, I don't think I could do 2 hours. Well, I could if I had to. I could do 2 sessions in a row, but I would probably be more likely inclined to do a couple of 90-minute sessions, just because there is research out there that says that if you ask someone to sit still and learn or listen for longer than 90 minutes, at the 90-minute mark, attentions and focus starts to fade. You could absolutely do a couple of sessions in 1 week. I have clients, and I have had clients in the past, and even though I'm not at this particular point taking clients anymore, I could see doing it in the future if I was seeing clients twice a week. For some clients, they're in so much pain, they are struggling so hard that 2 appointments in 1 week is really helpful for them. But that, of course, then means that they're going to be paying more money. So it's not an option that's available to everyone. But I wouldn't hesitate to make those first couple of sessions 90 minutes if you want to. And that's not out of line with what medical professionals do, right? If you have an initial appointment with a doctor, it's usually a longer appointment. It's just something that in the mental health field, we haven't really adopted that particular standing yet, but absolutely okay. Yes, yes. And then you want to have any current diagnoses of either psychological or biological illnesses. Again, just information gathering. You know, if someone says to us, well, actually right now I have the diagnosis of depression and PTSD. Okay, so that's information. And I might follow that up with a question. You know, who was it that gave you these diagnoses? Do you feel that these diagnoses are correct? You know, does this resonate for you? Do diagnoses matter to us? No, not really. I'm not going to treat a client who's been diagnosed with depression and is dealing with trauma different than I'm going to treat someone who does not have a diagnosis of depression and dealing with trauma. But it is going to go in my head, and I am going to keep that in mind as I'm sorting pieces up here on my whiteboard. It's not unusual for me to have clients come in to work with me who demonstrate some symptoms of depression. I'm not going to say you have depression, but I might say, you know, I'm seeing some symptoms that are similar to what I see in my clients who have been diagnosed with depression. Do you know about depression? Would you be willing to go in and have a chat with your family doctor and see if maybe this might be an issue for you? Because if someone is truly depressed, they're going to have some tendencies towards low motivation, low energy, more negative thinking. But again, keeping in mind, many trauma survivors experience depression off and on throughout their either history of trauma or after, and they just don't get diagnosed. So it's all information. It's not necessarily anything that I am going to act on or adjust the way that I work with that client. Biological illnesses as well. Do they have high blood pressure? You know, do they have cardiac disease? Do they have breast cancer? You know, do they have sleep apnea? You know, all of those things are going to give me information about their daily life experience. Sarah.
Yeah, can you just talk a little bit about if a client comes to us and they have kind of self-diagnosed themselves? Can you just talk a little bit of how you would approach that with the client?
Yeah, because clients do that too. And I can understand that. I would just then, you know, I'd say, you know, other diagnoses, and they might say, well, you know, I've never officially been diagnosed with, but I think I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's where I will go, okay, tell me what has you thinking that. I'm not going to say, oh, okay, well, based on that, no, you don't have it. Or based on that, yeah, I think you do have it. I just want to know what it is that they think they're experiencing that matches that diagnosis. Okay, I'm not going to say, yeah, no, I think you're doing it wrong and you don't actually have that. I'm just going to take the information and get curious, right? I'm going to get curious with my client, curiosity without judgment. And it's going to happen. In particular, actually, the complex post-traumatic stress disorder, I will have clients who say, you know, I'm diagnosed with PTSD, but I actually think it's complex PTSD. And then I'll just ask the question, what has you thinking that it is complex post-traumatic stress disorder? Okay. Prior diagnoses of either psychological or biological illnesses, if different than the current ones, okay? If your clients have been floating through the mental health system for a while, it is not unusual for trauma survivors to have been diagnosed with a myriad of different conditions, especially if what they're actually dealing with is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Again, this is not a diagnosis that is well recognized within the psychological community, within the mental health world, and it is actually not yet formally recognized by the mental health communities, especially here in the States. I'm not sure whether that would be the same in other countries. So it's not unusual for a client to have looked at that and gone, this is what I think is actually going on. But in the past, they may have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, attention deficit. You know, there can be a variety of diagnoses that clients have gotten from other providers. And why does that matter to me? Again, because it gives me the big picture. It also gives your client a chance here to talk about any trauma that they have received while they've been trying to get help, right? When I was going through the worst of my recovery, I did have a psychiatrist diagnose me with borderline personality disorder. It changed the way everyone that I worked with, how they reacted to me, how they responded to me. And I couldn't figure out what was going on until I figured out that he had diagnosed me with that and hadn't told me. So it caused a lot of trauma for me because I had medical providers. In particular, I had one hospital that I bounced in and out of probably 3 or 4 times. And the way that they treated me was completely lacking in compassion and completely sending me the message that I was a nuisance. And the way that I thought and operated in the world was wrong. And so giving your clients a chance to say, yes, this happened to me, can then give you the viewpoint of what has their experience been in the mental health system as they've tried to get help, okay? Because sometimes their experience will validate some of the lies they were told about themselves, right? So I was raised with that belief that I'm bad, I caused my abuse to happen, and you know, I'm never going to be good for doing anything. And then I try to get help, and along comes a gaggle of mental health professionals who, by diagnosing me with borderline and then changing the way they treated me, reinforced that same message. I'm bad. I'm wrong. I'm never going to be able to do anything right. Okay, so that just piles on top of that lie that I was taught when I was a child. So gathering that information can be really, really helpful in understanding your client's perspective as they move through the world trying to get help. Okay, you want to know their current relationship status. And again, big picture. And you want to know current and former partners or spouses. All we need is the first name. I don't need their last name. And the reason I even ask for their first name is because I don't like talking about people like, yeah, when your first husband did that, or yeah, when that guy that you dated in college did that. It just, to me, it feels so much more personal if I know their name. You know, yeah, when you were married to Bob. Yes, when you were in a relationship with Sheila. Okay. And I'm looking for someone that they considered to be a partner. Don't have to have been married to them. Don't have to have been engaged, but they considered them to be a partner. So you want to know the first name, the date the relationship started, the date it ended. You know, some people are going to go, you know what, I'm not sure. Okay, give me your best guess. What's the current status of that relationship? What I mean by that is, do you still have any contact with them? Are you two still friends, but you don't have a romantic relationship anymore? What's the status of that relationship? And do you or have you gone no contact with them? So there's a difference between, yeah, you know, we're still friends, but I don't talk to them on a regular basis, versus no, I set a boundary. I have absolutely no contact with this individual, and I won't respond if they try and reach out to me. Okay. So what are we looking here? We're looking for patterns, right? So if someone gives you a long list of spouses and partners, they may acknowledge that as they're giving it to you and say, yeah, I've had a lot, I've had a lot of relationships, and they have been really negative. That's information that we're gathering. Again, that's information I'm putting up on the whiteboards, right? Maybe I've got a whiteboard in my head that talks about relationships, romantic relationships, partner relationships. And as we talk about this, some of those patterns might unfold. You know, if they say to you, I always seem to pick the ones that take advantage of me. I always seem to pick predators. I don't know what's going on with that. You go, okay, that's interesting. Do you want us at some point to kind of take a deeper dive into that? You know, and you're going to get a lot of information about what they were taught about relationships as a child, and then what they might want to change about how relationships work in the present moment and moving forward. Okay, the names and of their children. Okay, so all I want is the first name, don't need the last name, gender, age, are they still alive? Do you have contact with them or no contact with them? And then are they your biological children? This matters because there is an element of adoption or fostering children that can have an added layer of trauma. You know, adoption is a beautiful, incredible, amazing thing, but it can sometimes be a hard thing for children and for parents to navigate. So I want to know that. I want to know if there's any history in there of adoption trauma, foster family trauma, anything like that. And then I want to know about their family of origin. So family of origin is mother, father, siblings. Nuclear family is current partner, children. Okay. Birth family, parents, siblings. Nuclear family, partner, children. So your family of origin, you know, again, so for me, this would be my father's first name was Bob, father, no, and obviously I have no contact with him. He is deceased. You know, and then my mother's name is Alice. It would be Alice, mother, yes, no contact. And then there would be my sister's name down here as well. And again, you're getting that big picture understanding of what their current life is like in terms of relationships with that family of origin. Now, their family of origin may not be one where they experienced any trauma. So there might be lots of, yeah, I do have contact. I see them, you know, I see them about once a month. I talk with them, you know, and then you're going to get a lot of information in here that could help you to understand that their family of origin is actually a very safe, supportive family members for them to connect with to get any types of support. And then we want their trauma history. Now, if you printed this out before today, it says abuse history. My apologies. I went in and changed it to trauma history. So you want to get the history of the trauma. Again, you're not looking for detailed information. So if you were talking with me and I said to you, well, I was sexually abused by my father between the ages of 3 and 11. I don't need a detailed incident by incident history. If someone said that to me, I would begin asking questions like, do you remember a lot of the abuse? Why did the abuse stop when you were 11? Did your mother know about what was going on? Okay, I don't need details about the sexual abuse for a couple of reasons. One is that there's no need for it. And keeping in mind that the neurons that fire together wire together. So I don't want to wire that trauma into their brain even more than it already is. So in trauma recovery coaching, and in fact, in therapy, when I used to do therapy, I never went back and got detailed. I never sat in that every session with a client and processed through things. Because again, research shows that the more that you dig into those details of the trauma over and over and over again, the more that you set those patterns and that process into concrete in a client's head. Okay, so I want to know, you know, ages, dates, what type of abuse. We also don't want to activate our clients in this particular process. So that's a second reason why we don't go in and get huge amounts of detailed information. So B, it says moderate the taking of history according to your client's tolerance, okay? And never work on this part of the intake session just before ending a session. If you'll remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked about pacing, right? And we looked at that bell curve. So if you have, you're getting into all this information, this deep information about the trauma, if you start to look at the time and you only have about 10 minutes left, pause and say, okay, let's come back to this and we'll look at it again next session. But for now, I want to make sure that you're grounded, that I have a chance to answer any questions that you might have, and we have a chance to go over anything else that you need. So I will then, you know, shut this down and we can come back to it at the next session. Okay, and so you want types of trauma as well. And this is a good time to educate your clients about what trauma is. You know, what is it that can define something as traumatic? You know, sometimes you will have clients who will downplay something that has happened for them. I see this frequently in partner relationships, right? Yeah, you know, he yelled at me, she yelled at me, they yelled at me, but they never hit me. So I don't classify it as domestic violence. But in fact, domestic violence is any type of abuse, verbal, emotional, psychological, financial, right? All of those make a relationship a domestic violent relationship, because violence, gosh, you guys, words and behaviors can be just as violent as actually striking someone or causing them physical harm or threatening them in a physical way. Words and behaviors can be just as violent. And I tell people, it is that non-physical violence that still haunts me now, years after getting out of a domestic violence relationship and years after walking away from my family of origin. It's what they taught me about myself that still haunts me. It's the lies that they taught me about myself, that I would never be good at anything. My father's infamous, you'll never be good for anything other than being a whore. Those are the things that lingered and haunted me. So sometimes we have to do some education about what trauma is at this point. Maybe they don't recognize that, living through that tornado when they were 21 and having half their house destroyed is trauma. Maybe they don't understand that they have had any racial trauma, or they've had any type of moral injury, right? Betrayal by a spouse. All of that is trauma. All of that is trauma. And because trauma is cumulative, not sequential, we want to understand any way that they have experienced trauma in their life. So sometimes when they, give me an episode of trauma, I might say, okay, I just want to take a few minutes here to ask about other types of things that sometimes people don't recognize as trauma. Have you ever been in a serious motor vehicle accident, a natural disaster? Have you had any medical trauma? And I'll ask questions like that, and they'll go, well, yeah, actually I have. I didn't realize that was, that was trauma. Or even, yeah, I have, but I don't think that's anything that's impacted me. Okay, let's just go ahead and list it on the paper anyway as a point of information. One thing with motor vehicle accidents, natural disasters, is that they send us the powerful message that we are powerless, right? Terrible things are going to happen to us and we don't have any control over it. We can't predict it. It's just going to come out of nowhere and create havoc in our lives, physical injury, emotional injury. And so although the client may not see it as traumatizing, that is something I'm going to put up in the whiteboard on my head of incidents that they have experienced that have taught them powerlessness. Okay. And that perhaps the world is not a safe place. So I'm going to gather all that information and put that on my internal whiteboard. So that's it for the initial session. No, I'm sorry, not the initial session. That was safety. That's it for the second session. That are the protocols for the second session. Now, if you get all the way through the intake and you still have time, that's fantastic. That's the time to say, thank you so much for giving me that. How do you feel now that we've talked about all of those things? Is there something else that you want to tell me that you want us to cover in our time together? Any number of questions that you can jump into at this point. Have you worked on any of this trauma before? Okay, what have you done? What's worked for you? What is it at this particular moment that's brought you to coaching? Maybe they've been dealing with their own trauma on their own for 5 or 10 years. So what is it right now that has them thinking, actually, now I want to reach out and get help from someone? So there's any number of questions that you can ask, things that you and your client can talk about to fill the rest of that time. So then in the third session is where we set recovery goals. Why do we wait until the third session? Because I don't think that in the initial session, you have enough of the big picture of your client's life in order to be an adequate helper for them to set recovery goals. Okay. Recovery goals are, things that we set with our client based upon their experience, where they've been, and where they want to go. And so until I have some of that same big picture that they have in their head, I might not be a really good helper at this particular point, especially if my clients will look at me and say, I don't know, I just want to be happy. That's all I want. I just want to be done with all this stuff and be happy finally at one point in my life. And then I might say, okay, what does happy look like? If I asked you, how will you know when you've reached that point? What is it? What is it that you're looking at? And then I'm going to pull information from my whiteboards and say, we talked about that pattern of relationships and how you see yourself getting in bad relationship after bad relationship after bad relationship. Do you think breaking that pattern would contribute to that being happy? And so I'm going to take some of these pieces that I know from my coaching experience, and I know what I know from about trauma that might contribute to being happy. Okay. If I set these goals before I know all this, and my client says to me, and it's not unusual, it's simply not unusual for a client to come into an initial coaching session and say, I have no idea what I need to do to get from here to where I want to be. I'm not even sure that I know where I want to be. All I know is I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want this pain. I don't want to be alone. I don't want to be lonely. I don't want to, be stuck in this dead end job. I don't want to be stuck in this dead end negative marriage anymore. And for us to be able to help them sort that out, we have to have a lot of the information that we ask for in the initial and second session. Okay. But important to remember that trauma recovery coaching is client-led. So I'm not going to sit down and say to my client, okay, based on what you've told me, I think you need to work on A, B, C, and D. And I think the best way for you to do those things is 1, 2, 3. That's not what we do as trauma recovery coaches. We don't set up a treatment plan for our client and walk them through it step by step. We listen to what they have to say. We listen to what they want. We've listened for 2 sessions now about all of these pieces that are gathered up on this whiteboard now. So we can make some suggestions. We can ask some really informed questions, such as that relationship question. We talked about, you told me about this pattern of negative relationships and how frustrated you were about it. Is addressing that piece something that will get you closer to that life you love to live? Okay, that's the phrase that I come back to time and time again with my clients. Let's get you to the life that you love to live. Okay, so that is why we ask all this information. We wait until the 3rd session, and we still ask a lot of questions. We're wanting the client to say, yes, this is what I want to work on. Okay, and keeping in mind those goals can migrate, mutate, shift, be put on hold at any point in the process. So maybe in this session, a client says to me, I want to be nicer to myself. I want to be nicer to myself. Absolutely. That is a fantastic recovery goal. What would that look like, right? So you're asking them, great goal. Now flesh it out for me. What would it look like? What would things look like when you are nicer to yourself? Because I want to know, what does that mean to them? Because maybe the first thing that comes into my head is they're going to talk more nicely to themselves. But that might not be what it means for them. They might have a specific thing in mind, for, the last 10 years, I've never allowed myself to buy a piece of clothing that I thought was pretty. So, that's one of the first things that I want to do. I want to feel like I deserve to have a piece of clothing that makes me feel pretty. Okay. If someone said to me, I want to learn to be nicer to myself, the first, second, or even third or fourth thing that comes into my mind is not buying a piece of clothing that makes them feel pretty. So I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't asked them to open up that bigger picture and tell me, what does that look like to you? Okay. And once I know that that's one of the ways that it looks to them, then I can say, fantastic. Would you like that to be one of the action steps in your recovery goals? Okay. So when we say recovery goals, we have the overarching goal, which is I want to be nicer to myself. Fantastic goal. Love it. Absolutely support you. So now let's look at what we call action steps, right? Because being nicer to myself is very nebulous, and it can be very ambiguous and really hard to say whether or not I've met that goal. So let's talk about concrete action steps. So every recovery goal will have action steps listed underneath it. So maybe the first action step for that person is going to be going out, doing some browsing through some stores, maybe even trying a few things on to see what they feel pretty in, right? It might be too much. I might say, okay, tell you what, this is what we're going to do then. Between now and next week, I want you to go out and buy that piece of clothing that makes you feel pretty. Come back next week. Actually, I want you to have it with you in the session so you can show it to me. That might be too much for that client, because underneath that, buying something that makes me feel pretty might be a lot of self-loathing, a lot of body hating, and a lot of judgment. And if I say to them, go buy it, come back next week with it, what I'm actually asking them to do is within the course of a week, change all that thinking so that they can go out and buy a piece of clothing that doesn't make them incredibly activated. Okay. So yes, it's about buying a piece of clothing, but there are so many things that are layered underneath it that it might take more baby steps, right? For that client who has all that self-loathing and hating their body, going shopping might activate them to the nth degree. So maybe the best step is doing some online shopping and looking and seeing what kind of things appeal to them that would make them think they would look pretty in them. Okay, it might take a series of small steps and a lot of discussion for what is underneath. If you haven't allowed yourself to buy something that makes you feel pretty for the last 10 years, do you know why that is? What is it about buying something that makes you feel pretty that sets it outside of the possibility for you? Okay. So while it might be a concrete step, there's a lot going on underneath that. So you're always asking questions, always getting curious. Your client might not know what it is that they might say, I want to be nicer to myself. And they might go, I don't know how to do that. I don't know what an action step might be. And that's when you're going to start to give some suggestions. You're not going to tell them what to do, but you might say something like, okay, when I've had clients who have had a goal similar to this in the past, we've talked about some different things. So I'm just going to name some things and you tell me if something resonates with you. Okay. So it might be allowing themselves, a girl's night out, or a guy's night out, or, a piece of clothing that they love. It might be addressing how they talk to themselves, their self-talk. It might be addressing boundary issues with other people who are treating them badly. And I'll just start to list. different ways that they can get to that, be nicer to myself in terms of what does that look like for them. And you know, after you've listed some, they might say, well, you know, actually that one, let's give that one a shot. Okay, let's give it a shot. Maybe they're going to try it out the next week and it's going to be like, yeah, no, that one didn't fit at all. There's no, some of it is a lot of trial and error. Some of it is, yeah, that sounds good, but then they're going to go out and try and do it. And it's going to be like, oh, no, never mind. That didn't feel good at all. And they're going to come back. As trauma recovery coaches, we typically do not put deadlines on goals and action steps. Why? Because survivors can be incredibly approval oriented and deadlines can make them feel very anxious. If they want to set a deadline, you know, of, yeah, I'm going to go out and buy that piece of clothing between now and next session, I might say, okay, but you know what? I just want to let you know that if you go out to do that, and you feel some kind of way or you think something and you don't do it, that's okay. Just come back to session and we'll talk about why that didn't work. And we will proceed from there and decide what to do. Okay. So I always let my clients know, you know, especially initially when we're beginning to work with each other, if you don't do it, that's okay. That's still information. Right? That will allow me to refine the next step, knowing why this step didn't work. Okay, Sarah.
Thanks, Bobbi. Yes, I've got a question here. It says, I have found that the biggest thing I wanted in my recovery was not the first step, it was several to many steps ahead. Have you found that? And then how would you talk about that?
Yes. That would be the client who says to me something like, I want to have a healthy relationship. Fantastic. Let's set that as a recovery goal. Do you want to set that as a recovery goal? Yes, I want that to be a recovery goal. And then I might say, you know, let's look at what relationships have been like for you. You know, that might be something that requires multiple steps to get to that place. Or I might pull what I have on the whiteboard about relationships that they gave me in appointments 1 and 2 and say, okay, let's look at this and see what is involved in getting from where you are to where you want to be, right? And it's not, you know, a client can't go from being steeped in negative education about relationships and negative education about their capacity to have healthy relationships to having a healthy one in the snap of a fingers. So it's going to take some while and it's going to take some stages and steps. It might take 6 months until they get to the point where they're able to say, yeah, I deserve to have a healthy relationship. And then another few months before they reach the point where they're able to go, okay, now I know what a healthy relationship looks like, right? Now I know I deserve it. Now I know what it looks like. And so the next phase might be, where do I look for a healthy relationship and what do I look for in a potential partner? So it's going to be a multi-layered process and it might be, you know, a lengthy process, but it can be one of their recovery goals that is constantly active, that they're constantly working on. I have found that for some clients, we'll work on this one for a bit. You know, it's a bit like putting together that puzzle, right? So, you know, I might get this particular element sorted and into place, and then it's like, I have no idea where to go from there. I look at all these pieces, they don't fit. So now I'm going to shift over here and work on this one, and then back, and then forth, and then to, and then fro. Or we'll be working on a couple of goals for quite a while, and then all of a sudden something pops up. So maybe my client has an opportunity to take a job in Spain. and they've never lived outside of the United States before. They're incredibly anxious about this. They want to say yes, but they're scared. So maybe the recovery goal, maybe these take a back seat for a while, and our recovery goal is, feel confident and prepare for moving to Spain. And we work on that one for a good chunk of time. So recovery goals can go active to quiet. One can be long-term, one can be short-term. There's no one right recovery goal, and there's really not a lot of wrong in terms of recovery goals, unless it's not client-led and unless you have too many operating at the same time, because that can get confusing, and it also can be very difficult for a client to manage, having a lot of recovery goals functioning at one time. In my practice, usually the number of recovery goals that I'm actively working with a client with is probably not more than 3 at a time. Unless one of them is one we set, but it's over here, it's in the background, it's not on the table in this particular moment. So we'll shelve some of those and focus in on and how actively working with only about 3. I hope that helps. If that doesn't help, let me know. And I was thinking, as Sarah was reading that question, there might be someone who says something that can't happen unless they also first do A, B, and C. And that's that point of, okay, you want your dream job. What needs to happen to get from where you are to having that dream job? Because we can't just say, get the dream job if you're miles away from it and don't even know what the process is going to look like until you can begin pursuing that. So sometimes we do have to say, fantastic, love that goal. What would be the first step? Okay. And asking questions like, what do you think has stood in the way in the past of you getting that dream job? What's the job that you've had that's closest to that dream job? What did you like about it? What is it about that particular job that appeals to you? Curiosity, over and over and over again. Okay, so a lot of this is what I have just talked through with you. In the other mental health professionals, you have a treatment plan, right? And oftentimes it's the steps that I want my client to take, the tools that I'm going to use, and sometimes deadlines. Some of this comes from just the mental health system in general. Some of this comes from insurance companies, right? Insurance companies, if they're paying for therapy, they want to see measurable progress. And so they will directly ask therapists to say, okay, tell us your plan and tell us when you anticipate reaching those treatment goals. But that's not something that we do. And not to forget that we operate from a strength-based model, okay? So if you have a client who is saying to you and that their goal, one of their goals is to stop being so mean to themselves, that's that process. Remember how we talked about, looking at that big garden of your life and there's a bunch of weeds? We don't want our clients out there working on pulling up all the weeds. We want them to be doing the flower planting, right? We want them to start nurturing the things that they do want, not spending their energy pulling out and getting rid of the weeds, because eventually more flowers, and they will just choke out the weeds, right? So if someone gives me a recovery goal that's based in a negative way, I say, actually, let's work towards something that feels good. So is it okay to set that recovery goal as, I want to speak to myself, to treat myself with kindness and self-compassion? Okay. So then rather than the goal trying to be stamping out the things that they do to themselves or say to themselves that are unkind, instead we're going to start to nurture the things that are kind and compassionate, right? We want to build those new neural pathways. You know, our experience with our trauma has probably done a very good job of wiring together the things that contribute to our treating ourselves badly. We don't want to spend any more time in those neural pathways. Instead, we want to build the new neural pathways so that they become the dominant pathway in someone's head. So if they, again, if they phrase something in a negative way, I want to stop taking dead-end jobs that only pay me minimum wage. You know, it's like, okay, how about instead we phrase it as, I want to find a job that pays me a wage that I am happy with. Okay, or they can even specify, I want to find a job where I earn blank. That's okay. They might find that that something will come up, a job that they might really enjoy that might be a little bit less than blank, and that's okay. But to look at the goal as stop getting dead-end jobs, you know, that's hard. It's hard to define that. It's hard to spend your time sitting in, I always get dead-end jobs, and then just reinforcing that wiring together. Instead, it's like, okay, what do I need to do to get the job where I earn X wage? Do I need to get some more education? Do I need to change career fields? You know, what is it that needs to happen for me to get to that place? So instead of, I want to stop hating myself, I want to learn to love myself. I want to learn to think good things about myself. So we build up the positive. So again, this is the action steps versus the recovery goals. Strong action steps require action, not passivity, right? So I'm not waiting for something to happen to me. I'm actively pursuing what it is that I want. And we've talked before about that concept of words and actions, right? The words and the actions are what it takes to change a behavior. And that's also how we get something from our head to our heart, right? I have to not only, if I want to say, I want to learn to love myself, not only do we have to say, I'm lovable, but we have to act in a way that reflects that we feel lovable towards ourselves. And maybe initially you're not going to feel that, and it might feel a little bit false. But I promise that the behaviors will begin to shape the way that you speak to yourself, and you will get more and more and more alignment of those two things, and they will start to feel more and more and more truth, right? And you want to make sure that you set action steps that are achievable, because success builds momentum, right? So if my goal is to have a healthy partner relationship, maybe my first step is going to be looking at, what do I want in a potential partner? Okay, so I'm not joining an app, I'm not going out and looking, I'm just defining for myself, what would that look like? And maybe that then is not a scary step, and they can sit down and go, okay, yeah, actually I can do that one, I can do that one. And they do it, they come back the next week and they say, I did it, I have a list. Fantastic. Now they are going to feel more positive about taking a next step, right? So instead of saying, okay, the action step is going to be you finding a healthy relationship, go forth, do that, see you next week, you know? And they're going to come back next week and I'm going to say, did you do it? Did you find your healthy partner? And they're going to go, no, I didn't. You know, if you have a client who's still steeped in a great deal of shame, they're going to feel now an even greater amount of shame because they didn't do the thing. And then that just puts them in a deeper hole, in a deeper hole, in a deeper hole. And the more that they fail at doing the action steps and meeting the recovery goals, the harder it is going to be for them to start making progress, because they're just digging a hole underneath themselves. And the amount of success that will even take them up to ground zero is going to be significant. So by all means, set action steps and set goals that are small and achievable. Even if your client says, oh yeah, I can do that one, fantastic. Let's set that as the goal for the first week. What do you think? Is that okay? I want you to have some success in this area. I'm always willing to explain to clients why I might advise one thing or another. You know, if they say, well, that just really seems really simple, you know, I can do that, you know, right when we're done with this appointment. Fantastic. The reason why I advise that you do something that feels really simple to you is because success builds momentum, right? It's that taking the snowball at the top of the hill and rolling it downhill. The more momentum that I gain, the more that I can knock those other barriers that are out of the way. So I'm always telling my client, this is why I think that might be a good idea. This is why I might advise you to do this particular thing. Now, if they don't want to, if they want to say, no, that's too easy, I don't want that one, I want to do something else, then absolutely, we go to the next stage, we go to the next level, you know, and there's no fruit to be born from trying to wrestle a particular goal or action step out of a client's hands, you know, because the message you're telling them is they're not capable of managing things for themselves. So let's look at the worksheet. So this is the recovery goals worksheet. Each worksheet has one recovery goal on it. And I put these in my file folders with my clients. I might have, if I've worked with someone for a long period of time, I might have 20 different recovery goals, 10 that they've completed and are done, 5 that are on hold right now, you know, and 3 that we're actively working on. But each worksheet, one recovery goal. And so there's the goal up here, and here's the action steps that they might take. If they've taken a lot of action steps, then you can bring in another page that has the same goal on it and keep going. And you know, if your client says, hey, can I have a copy of that? Absolutely, you can. I will put this sheet up. I will screen share with my client and put this sheet up so they know what it is that I'm doing. And then absolutely, I'll send you a copy after session is over. I'll make a copy for you so that they have it. So I recommend that in that third session, you do a couple of recovery goals and set at least one action step for each recovery goal. And then review them every week before you go into a session, right? So you're going to remind yourself, okay, I'm seeing Susan today. These are her recovery goals. And ask, you know, maybe that particular recovery goal isn't part of a topic that you cover in that session. Always give yourself enough time to check in and say, how's it going with looking online for that piece of clothing that you think will make you feel pretty. Okay, so always check in. If it's not something that's covered in the session, check in with them. How's it going? Okay, and leave a few minutes to talk about why it's going well, to celebrate that, or why it's not going well. Okay, because that's the reason for the coaching, is moving them from where they are to where they want to be. Okay. You may take this worksheet, as is the same with any worksheets. You can copy the content, paste it on your own letterhead. You can, all we ask is that you keep the footer that gives the copyright on it. So any of these worksheets that I have given you, you can put on your own letterhead. You can format them in a way that you like. You can, like I said, with the intake, you can add any questions that you want to know. Say, for instance, you've decided you want to work within the field of trauma and addiction. So in this initial intake and second session, you might then be asking questions about, okay, so let's talk about the addiction. Tell me what substances are involved. How long has this been an issue? Have you had periods of sobriety? What do you think played into the role of not the role, but the occurrence of a relapse? What have you done? What help have you accessed in your recovery? Okay. All of those things are things that you can add into your initial intake. If you would like to work with clients who have a Buddhist perspective on life, you might add in some questions about their spiritual practices and their spiritual beliefs. What works for them? What life truths are they, basing their life on? What are they holding on to in the spiritual arena that gives them strength and gives them understanding of what's going on in their life? Okay. So feel free to add more to this initial intake, but I ask that you not take anything away, right? Because all of these things that I've asked for you to gather are pretty significant in terms of understanding someone's trauma history and trauma background. Okay. Keeping in mind as well, this is the second session, so you and your client may not have had an opportunity to build up a lot of trust yet. So don't be surprised if they give you some information or they withhold some information, and later on they reveal that they actually had another sibling who died, who was murdered when they were 10, but they just didn't feel comfortable telling you that in the second session. And that's okay. That's okay. You are earning and gaining trust from the moment that they step into that initial Zoom session. So it might take them a while to feel like they can unpack the hardest things that they have, carrying around in their backpack or stuffed in their pockets. Does anybody have any questions? That is it for the content for today's class. So second session is the detailed intake. Third session is setting recovery goals with your clients. Okay. All right. No homework this week. Don't forget to pop over and take a look at which triad that you are assigned to, and start making connections with your triad partners and your supervisor. And if you have any questions, let us know. Okay. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.